folks, welcome back to another lesson in Swift for beginners. In the last lesson we talked about loops, and in today's lesson we're going to be talking about optionals and unwrapping optionals. And a little bit of a preface, this is one of my personal favorite topics, and it also happens to be a topic that a lot of people struggle with, including myself. So bear with me, we're going to get through this together. So we're going to pick up exactly where we left off with loops. So let's get rid of all this. Let's give this a title of optionals. So let's start off with what an optional actually is. So an optional is a way in Swift where you can signify that a variable may or may not contain a value. So an optional is actually a part of a type. So let's say we have a variable called name, and here it is Joe, right? To write this more verbose, we can write this as name is going to be a string and it's going to be Joe. Now, what if this app that we're writing, what if the program we're making is a app where the user can log out, right? Let's say when they log out, we want to empty out all the variables of the last logged in user. Let's say now we want to say name equals nothing, which in other words is nil, right? This is going to yell at us because we've actually explicitly set up here, hey, name should always be a string. So in theory, what you could do is this, right? Name is a string, but it's just empty now. But this still counts as a value. So what you actually want to be doing is you want to say name is nil. And again, nil is just kind of nothing. Nil is, it points to nothing. Name has no value. So, but it's yelling at us because it's saying it expects a string, and nil is not a string. So what gives, man? This can't work. So what we want to do is put a question mark in front of this string, and this error will go away. And what this question mark means is this name may or may not be a string. And the reason that Apple actually chose the question mark symbol to signify this is it's kind of like a question. So if you imagine like someone asking you like, how are you today? Or like, so let's say someone asks you a question and you kind of like, you may know the answer, you may not know the answer. Like the notion of a question and a question mark is it may or may not fulfill what you're looking for. And that's why the question mark symbol was chosen. And a lot of people get irked of why this was chosen and they find it confusing. But that's why it was chosen for some context. But now we can say this name is nil. So now this adds a little bit of complexity because Swift is a strongly typed language, the type of this now is not string. The type of name is now string optional. And it's super important that you understand that. A type that is also optional is completely different from just being that type. So if we have an int and we have an int optional, they are two completely different things. So what I want to signify here is let's say we have a variable and we call it x, and let's say it's int optional and it's 3, and let's take this and we say this is z and this is 12, right? We have two variables and they're both int optional, but they both have a value of an int. In theory, down here we can say they're nil because we've specified the question mark and say that it could be int or it could be nothing because it's optional. This is cool. But now what if we wanted to do, let's actually make this y. What if we wanted to do result equals x plus y? Now, it will yell at us about this. And now why will it yell at us about this? Because technically x and y are both numbers. We should be able to add them. But that's where people get tripped up. X and y are not ints. X and y are int optionals. And a type that is considered something optional, think of it as a box. The actual type, anything optional, is a box. The value is inside the box. So here what we're basically saying is we're saying, hey, add box x and box y. Swift doesn't know that you're actually referencing the value inside the box, which in this case is 3, and in this case is 12. So this brings us to the notion of unwrapping an optional. And that's why the terminology unwrapping was used, and that's why people use it, and that's why it's officially supported by Apple in their documentation. The notion of unwrapping is kind of looking in the box to see if there's a value before you try to use it. Because we've said that this might be nil, in other words, might not have a value, we don't want to try to add two numbers together if one of the numbers is non-existent. So how do you unwrap an optional? What you basically do is you say if let value equals x. So now this, where did this value come from? Where did this if come from? Where did this let come from? Etc. etc. So let's dive a little deeper into this. So what we're saying here is we're saying if, conditionally, if this value equals x, in other words, if something is inside of x, we can use it in here. Now where did this term value come from? This term value we kind of just made up. You can call this whatever you want. It does not have to be the term value or anything remotely related whatsoever. It's us creating a constant, thus using let, of the value inside of x. So if we actually put a print in here, I'll say has value, and if we come down here, we'll see in just a second that it does come into this block because it does have a value. But if we take this and if we say this is now nil, notice that this print should go away, which it does. And it goes away because we're saying if there is something in x, come into here. Otherwise, you can't come into here. And right now it's nil, so we don't come into here. And what this is complaining about over here is we've created this let value, but we're not using it below. So it's kind of like, hey man, you created this constant, but you're not using it. Why did you create it? So let's actually make this 3. And let's delete this print. And in here, let's create another if let. We're going to say value 2. And it's y. And then we can say result is value plus value 2, and then we can print out the result. And the reason, again, that this can work now using value and value 2, these two constants, is value and value 2 actually point to the thing inside of that kind of black box that is known as an optional. So you don't want to add the actual boxes together. And again, the way of the method of explaining it as a box is something that I like to use to explain to those that I teach, and that's also kind of how I learned. And I think it's helpful to visualize it. That you can't add two boxes together. You want to take the numbers in the boxes and add them if the numbers exist. Now, that's the notion of an optional and how to unwrap an optional. And the reason they call it unwrapping is because it's kind of like a box. So now I know I've showed this example with ints here. Anything can be optional. So let's say we have a variable here, and it's price, and it's going to be a double optional. Notice that before, if you recall from prior lessons, if we didn't have this and we didn't assign a value, it yells at us. And it will yell at us here in just a second. Well, if we put this inside of a class, it'll yell at us. And the reason it will yell at us is A, we don't have an initializer in this case, but practically, let's try it this way. Let's see if this wants to cooperate today. So it's not wanting to throw the error right now, but the reason that syntactically this is not correct in an actual application is because this is a constant, and we said it's a string, but we didn't assign a value. But because it's a constant, we can't come down here later and be like, this equals 1.23. In an actual application, here it's letting us do it, I think, for the sake of, because this environment is a playground and it lets you play with the language. But what we can do here is we can say it is a double optional. So by default, if we do a print of price, and then now here we do price equals this, and we do a print of price, we'll see that this price initially, well, let's actually do it this way. Let's see, well, it's not going to print properly, but let's make this a variable. And let's do, this is nil, and let's do price is now 1.23. The reason it was yelling before is we had it as a let, and as you recall from an earlier video, we cannot assign a value, we cannot change the value of a constant, which is why it was yelling. But let's do a print price, and before we change it, let's do a print of price. And you'll see initially price is nil, and then the price is this optional with our value inside of it. So price isn't actually the number we assigned here. Price is optional with this number inside. And I'm going to stress it for the last time, not to beat the dead horse, but if we say type of price and we come over here, if you think the type of price will be double, that's incorrect. The price is optional double or double optional. Most people read it optional double. But let's come over here and we'll see that it's actually an optional double, right? The double is inside the optional because it may or may not be nil. And that's, I think, a good spot for me to kind of end this lesson without being more redundant. But optionals are very important, and they're used literally all over the place due to the nature of a lot of apps. So you can imagine if you open the Facebook app and you try to the app tries to load your feed, and some error occurs and nothing comes back from the request that was made to get your feed, your posts. The type could be a class called feed, but the variable would be feed optional, right? Because it might have a feed, but it might not because something might go wrong. So optionality is a very good way to represent errors and kind of give yourself some flexibility to move around in your code and change some stuff up and not always worry about having a value assigned to a particular variable or constant. So yeah, with that being said, leave a like if you found this video helpful. Please leave a comment or just start a discussion if you need help, clarity. More than happy to help. And I'll see you guys in the next lesson.